Did this mean they might get out of there alive after all? He tried to picture the other agents out there. How were they reacting to this? Would they all just give up and go away? Or were some of them too juiced up and bent on revenge to accept the president's order? He wasn't ready to believe that it was safe to come out of hiding, but just then the possibility that he might live to take Jessica out for lunch or a movie seemed overwhelmingly wonderful. Just minutes before, he hadn't dared to hope for even such a simple thing, but he also hardly dared to believe what he heard coming out of that old radio on its cinderblock stand. You glorify people such as Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, Benjamin Franklin and Patrick Henry, the voice on the radio continued. But have you ever read a word they said? They were all too authoritarian for my liking, but by today's standards, they were anti-government extremist terrorists. They advocated breaking the law. They said that when a government infringes on the rights of the individual, the people have a right and a duty to do whatever it takes, even if it means bloody revolution, to get rid of that government. Would anyone like to claim that the government we now have is a protector, not a violator of individual rights? The founders taught how important it is for the people to remain armed and to always retain the ability to forcibly overthrow the government if it becomes oppressive. Those kooks, wackos, and extremists that we call our founding fathers committed treason, advocating violent, illegal resistance against their own government, the British Crown. And over what? A few puny little excise taxes on tea and pieces of paper. And what have you done with the country they gave you? Today, you tolerate a level of oppression and intrusion far beyond King George's wildest dreams. Yet you cannot even imagine engaging in passive resistance, much less forcible revolution, in defense of your own freedom. The bravest thing you'll ever do is walk into a booth every few years where no one can see you and press a button to say which of two slave masters you'd rather be owned by. And when some radical does suggest that it's time to grow a spine and resist this heinous empire, you all rush to be the first to condemn that person. Like well-trained slaves, you take pride in your subservience and obedience while despising those few who have the will to try to escape the plantation, or worse yet, to overthrow the master. If the founders could see you today, they'd be ashamed of you for the opportunity you threw away, the freedom they won for you, which you have so thoroughly squandered. Samuel Adams might as well have been talking to all of you when he said, "If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chain sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen." Jason looked around the room. In the dim lantern light, he saw alert, attentive expressions on all of the faces around him. "Land of the free and home of the brave," came the voice from the radio. "Hardly. You are a nation of enslaved cowards, afraid to act, afraid even to think. You keep telling yourselves that you, the American people, are independent, strong, brave, and free. You are none of the above. Again, I don't expect one speech to change your narrow minds, but before you put your heads back in your rear ends, before you switch the channel to some inane trash approved by the Ministry of Truth, guaranteed to keep you distracted and stupid, I have something to say, and you had better listen close." It still didn't seem real to Jason, that tinny little sound of that radio, compared to the larger-than-life devastation, death, and destruction he had seen firsthand. It couldn't be real. "Some of us still love freedom," the president said. "Some of us believe that every person belongs to himself. We don't belong to your stupid collective or to your crooked politicians, and we don't need your permission or legislation from your masters to be free. We don't care what you think. We don't care what this bunch of dishonest jackasses sitting in front of me thinks." It suddenly occurred to Jason that this rant was happening right in front of Congress, and he tried in vain to imagine how they were reacting to all of this. "We feel no need to refute the government worship that you imagine to be learned opinions," the president continued. "We're done asking you to let us be free. I'm here to tell you we will be free. And if you want to parrot back the rhetoric you've been fed all your lives about how society can't exist without rulers, about how there would be death, destruction, and mayhem if no one was controlling all of us, you go right ahead. Predict doom and gloom until you're blue in the face. Tell us it can't be done all you'd like. And if time proves you right, you can feel smug in your little cages while you say, told you so. Or if time proves us right, as it will, you can watch the second great American experiment from a safe distance and see what humanity could be without masters and slaves and the false gods you now bow to. Jason's mind was still a bit on the defensive, suspiciously watching out for the types of cunning propaganda designed to justify lawlessness, the types of rhetoric used by cult leaders to dupe the ignorant. While this renegade president was probably saving Jason's life, that didn't mean he had to agree with him. He felt as if he was floundering in a sea of unfamiliar ideas. Whenever he thought he'd found something solid to stand on, a wave came and washed it away. He'd lost count of the times since he'd been here that he thought one of David's ideas was ridiculous, only to discover on closer examination that it made a lot of sense. He'd heard Grant Collins speak before, and he always sounded good. Jason wasn't much into politics. He just knew that Collins was a big supporter of law enforcement. But Collins sounded different now. He didn't sound like a politician manipulating public opinion, but like a real man honestly expressing deeply held convictions. And as much as Jason resisted admitting it, even to himself, it felt like the truth, an honest, raw truth he had never heard spoken aloud before. You wave your flags and give lip service to freedom, but you wouldn't know freedom if it slapped you in the face. In fact, it did slap you in the face, and you called it a terrorist cult and demanded that it be stamped out. Do you see this symbol? You were told it's the insignia of a terrorist cult, and despite the fact that the truth was one book read away, most of you just believed what you were told. He's talking about your book, Doug said to David in an excited whisper. This symbol is nothing more than a way of expressing a very simple but profoundly important concept. I, the one displaying this symbol, understand that I own myself and that you own yourself. It's that simple. My life and everything I do with my life belongs to me, as yours does to you. We are free human beings, not domesticated animals. We do not acknowledge anyone's right to own us or to rule us, and likewise we claim no right to own or rule over anyone else. That's all it means. And contrary to what you were told, this image does not represent some monolithic cult where everyone believes the same thing about everything. It's about understanding one simple, basic truth of humanity on top of whatever else someone happens to believe. That it's wrong to start a fight. That it's wrong to be the one to first use force, even if you hide it under the label of government. And that simple belief can be held by all sorts of different people with all sorts of different viewpoints, from goth punks to hippie flower children, to conservative Christians, or to any average Joe, and to everyone in between. That's the reason for the many colors on the design. Freedom doesn't require us all to be the same. Instead, it allows us all to coexist peacefully without being the same. You don't have to agree with everyone else on everything. You don't have to like everyone else. I know I don't. All you must do to be a piece of the iron web is acknowledge that each person owns himself, and that it is wrong to initiate force or fraud against him, no matter what you think of his religion, his culture, his race, his intelligence, his age, his behavioral choices, his income level, his hairdo, his taste in music, or anything else. We view and treat each other as adult human beings, each responsible for his actions, each obligated to judge right and wrong for himself. We detest the alternative, the giant daycare center that so many of you seem to prefer, where a bunch of whimpering brats whine about their needs and demand preferential treatment based on some twisted, delusional notion of fairness, while at the same time begging the nanny to punish the kids they don't like. You evade your responsibility as human beings by hallucinating a false god that relieves you of the duty to think for yourselves. You don't want to be free, because being merely obedient requires so much less thought. And so you demand to be ruled. You insist on being enslaved. Then you beg your masters to please be nice to you. Pathetic. Well, some of us have outgrown such schizophrenic insanity. Some of us realize the self-evident truth that no election, no constitution, no legislation, and no other pseudo-religious political ritual can bestow upon anyone the right to rule another. Nothing can make a man into a rightful master. Nothing can make a man into a rightful slave. Jason turned to look at Jessica's face. She was smiling now, and her eyes were shining with hope. Doug got up and went to the entrance. He went up a couple steps and pushed the debris away from the entrance hole. The sunlight of a clear day flooded through the gap, lighting up 6 dirty but hopeful faces. Using violence against someone who has committed no force or fraud is wrong, came the voice from the radio. What could be more self-evident than that? Some people call the concept libertarianism. I have another term for it, stating the bleeding obvious. It's wrong to start a fight. You can call the aggressors government. You can pretend that they represent us all. You can whine about the common good. You can label the bullies law enforcers, and you can call their violence law or regulation or taxation or whatever you like. It's still wrong. And some of us have been trying to explain this to you for centuries. Guess which extremist fringe kook terrorist said this? Quote, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will, within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. I do not add within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. End quote. Imagine that. You can do whatever you want as long as you let other people do what they want. How extreme. Thomas Jefferson was the radical who said that. He also wrote in the Declaration of Independence, maybe you've heard of it, that when a government becomes destructive of individual liberty, the people have the right and the duty to alter or abolish that government. So how many of you have lifted a finger to resist the federal Leviathan? Or are you still telling yourselves that the United States government is pro-freedom? How long will you tell yourselves that lie? Even those of you who consider yourselves rebels, most of you seem to think that acting obnoxious and rude qualifies you as nonconformists, yet you end up as nothing more than useful puppets of the establishment you rail against. From the hippies of the 60s to the 80s punks with pierced noses and purple hair to the so-called revolutionaries of today, generation after generation of hip, cool rebels have whined about the status quo only to turn around and embrace the old heinous evil of communism just because it came in a new package. Under the labels of social justice and economic equality, you pitch the same sick, twisted, vicious collectivist oppression implemented by Stalin, Lenin, Mao, and Castro, only you're too ignorant to know it. Even when you can see the evils of a particular regime, you can't escape the mindset of authority worship. Your solution is always to find a new, kinder, wiser master. It never occurs to you that there is no such thing and can be no such thing as a good slave master. It never occurs to you to get rid of the tyrannical master of the day and replace him with nothing, to yank the despotic king off the throne and to put no one in his place, to leave the throne empty. And so when the people, tired of that delusional God-complex, collectivist, warmongering, lying thief, George Bush Sr., they replaced him with Bill Clinton, a delusional, God-complex, collectivist, warmongering, lying thief. And when they got tired of him, after 8 years, they put in yet another tyrannical Bush, this one worse than the first, for 8 more years. Even the spectacle of having to choose between John McHitler and Barack O'Stalin in 2008 wasn't enough to shake the American people out of their blind faith in the cult of democracy. A long time ago, Lysander Spooner explained that a man is no less a slave simply because he is allowed to occasionally choose a new master. But you didn't listen. You still believe that your precious right to vote means that you're free. It doesn't. It means only that your masters have found a way to trick you into not resisting by giving you the illusion that you have some say in what they do. H.L. Mencken told you that the urge to save mankind is almost always a front for the urge to rule, but you didn't listen. Time after time, crooks have posed as saviors, and you kept falling for it. Louis Brandeis, when he wasn't rubber-stamping the politician's socialist agenda, warned that we should be most on guard to protect our liberties when the government's purposes are beneficent. But you weren't listening. Every new goodie, every promise to give something to the needy, to help this or that group, to save the economy, you fall for them all, hook, line, and sinker. 2,000 years ago, even Plato gave the warning, saying that every tyrant, when he first appears, is a protector. But you weren't listening. Alexis de Tocqueville warned that the American Republic would survive until Congress realized it could bribe the people with their own money. But you didn't listen. You still vote for whatever con man promises you the most pork, the best handouts, the most goodies, all of which are paid for with money he stole from you in the first place. Likewise, you weren't listening when Frederick Bastiat warned you that government is the great fiction through which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. Frederick Douglass, a former slave, explained that no man can put a chain around the ankle of his fellow man without eventually finding the other end fastened to his own neck. But you weren't listening. You all clamor to see who can be first to beg government to impose all manner of laws and rules upon your neighbors, and in the process you end up advocating your own enslavement. Mr. Douglass also explained that whatever level of injustice and wrong people will quietly submit to is exactly the level that will be imposed upon them. But you weren't listening. Edmund Burke proclaimed that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. You've probably even heard that one, but you still didn't listen. Albert Einstein put it another way, saying that the world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the evil people, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. But you weren't listening. What have you done to resist the evils you see in the world, or even in your own country? Hide in a corner to avoid trouble? Keep your head down and try not to make waves? Sophie Scholl, member of the White Rose, an underground group in Germany which spoke out against the Nazis, described the situation quite well. The real damage, she explained, is done by the millions of people who just want to survive, the honest men who just want to be left in peace, who don't want their little lives disturbed by anything bigger than themselves, who don't want to make waves or make enemies. Sophie and her friends had their heads chopped off for daring to say such things, while the hordes of compliant cowards in Germany did nothing. And are you any different from them? You people who live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, when have you lifted a finger to oppose the injustice you see? Or have you even noticed it? Are you so busy getting along and doing what you're told that you can still imagine this to be a free country? Have you not noticed the trillions of dollars the American tyrants steal every year? Have you not noticed the millions of nonviolent people who now live as captives behind razor wire fences? Have you not noticed the hundreds of thousands of people abroad they have exterminated? Have you not noticed their tentacles creeping into every aspect of your lives? Have you been wearing your blinders for so long that you can't see what's going on all around you? As John Hay pointed out, and as millions of people have learned the hard way, the evils of tyranny are rarely seen except by those who resist it. Do you think that the fact that you personally haven't gotten into trouble yet because you're too much of a chicken shit to even rattle your own cage door means that you're free? Martin Luther King Jr., when he wasn't falling for collectivist propaganda, explained that true peace is not the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. But you weren't listening. You look around and you don't see the open strife and violent conflict that exists in many other countries, and you interpret that to mean that we have peace and freedom here. It means nothing of the sort. It means only that most of the victims of oppression here aren't resisting it. And that is not a sign that you are strong and free. It is a sign that you are weak and cowardly. When the peasants quietly do as they're told, the violence underlying all government remains hidden. It is only resistance that brings it out into the open. The master doesn't need to whip the obedient slaves, but that doesn't mean those slaves are free. For millennia, radicals have been trying to tell you that as a human being, you were born to be free, that your rights do not come from any law or any government, and that it is your right and duty to preserve liberty for yourself, to allow others their freedom, and to never let the schemes and deceptions of would-be tyrants fool you into choosing the predictable, secure life of a caged animal over the uncertain, challenging life of a human being. But you didn't listen. Well, some of us are tired of trying to get you to listen.